Brian, I also want to pause for a moment to bring in former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani. Rima, are you on with us? Yes. All right. Thank you so much for being on with us. Just walk us through, as a former federal prosecutor yourself, walk us through the prosecution's process here through this case and its strategy.
Well, Andrew, Brian touched upon some of this. Some of it is, of course, just bringing a knife to a proverbial fist fight, and it was really more pushing and shoving. But here's the most important thing to know about self-defense, and it applies in Texas and in every state. The use of force has to be reasonable, and it has to be proportionate to the threat. So Brian talked about it. You are using deadly force. You are stabbing someone in the chest when you have been pushed. Doesn't matter whether it's one arm or two. He wasn't even punched. So this was always going to be a very difficult case for the defense, setting aside the racial overtones and all that, because there is a significant and disproportionate escalation of force. I always thought from the beginning of this case, there was no way the defense was going to perfect self-defense. And by that, I mean, there was no way the defense was going to be able to establish that this was reasonable, because it was not objectively reasonable. I think the only shot they had was maybe imperfect self-defense. So that is, if Karmelo Anthony genuinely, but unreasonably believed that he was at imminent risk, that reduces murder to manslaughter. That was always going to be the best shot. But when he didn't take the stand to tell his story, there's no way that the jurors were going to be able to hear his side and what he was thinking. And the conventional wisdom in a self-defense case is that the defendant needs to take the stand and testify. And I understand why he didn't. It would have subjected him to a pretty grueling cross-examination. But there was really no shot at manslaughter once the defense chose that strategy. And it was really an all or nothing. Perfect self-defense, an acquittal, and a walk. That wasn't going to happen. Or a conviction for first-degree murder, which is what we saw in pretty quick order. 3 hours of deliberation really goes to show how strong the prosecution's case was here.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about that. What do you make of the quick verdict here, given how high stakes of a trial this was and all the national attention as well?
Well, it's hard to get 12 men and women to agree on anything, right? But when you get them to agree to a verdict this quickly, that just goes to show that the defense really didn't have much of a shot. Maybe there was one or two holdouts, but they quickly were won over. You know, typically the jury will deliberate for, about an hour for each day of trial testimony. That's just a general rule of thumb. So this was certainly much shorter than that. And look, obviously the jurors were sequestered. They wanted to go home. But the facts here really weren't in dispute, right? Was Karmelo Anthony outnumbered? Was it a 50-pound weight differential? Was it 100? But the bottom line is he brought a knife to a sporting event. And even if it was illegal under Texas state law because it was less than 5 inches, it certainly wasn't legal or appropriate at a track meet. And I think the defense's argument that it was there not as a weapon, but to cut tape, that just wasn't really believable. And the fact that, again, you have him stabbing Metcalf in the chest, right? You have him seemingly ditch the murder weapon, maybe run away. Again, I know that some of that was in dispute, whether he really tried to discard the weapon or whether he was fleeing or not. But ultimately, the witnesses that testified in this case, witness after witness for both the prosecution and the defense, they essentially said the same thing. And really, the differences were, well, is it normal for someone to go in a rival team's, tent? Should he have left? But the fact is, he was pushed, he was assaulted, he had a right to respond appropriately, reasonably. And having that knife and stabbing Metcalf in the chest, I think most people, even people that aren't in stand your ground states, people that aren't in really pro self-defense states like in Texas and the South, would think that that was an inappropriate, disproportionate, unreasonable response. And it has nothing to do with race. Doesn't matter whether it was a white defendant or black and the victim was vice versa. I don't think personally, as a lawyer who's handled many of these types of cases, that is appropriate when you were just pushed.
Those just joining us, a jury finding Karmelo Anthony guilty of murder. Brian Buckmeyer and Neama Rahmani, thank you so much.